Okay, this is Frost video number 2. I've decided to split it into 3 to make for faster uploads. And this is going to be a short discussion of design because there are also questions about design that are on the test. Let me pull design up here and I will read it out loud. I found a dimpled spider, fat and white, on a white heel holding up a moth like a white piece of rigid satin cloth, assorted characters of death and blight, mixed ready to begin the morning rite, like the ingredients of a witch's broth. A snowdrop spider, a flower like a froth, and dead wings carried like a paper kite. What had that flower to do with being white? The wayside blue, an innocent halo? What brought the kindred spider to that height? Then steered the white moth thither in the night. What but design of darkness to appall, if design governed in a thing so small? Couple of background um, notices. A helol is supposed to be blue. It's a flower. And this one's not blue, it's white, which certainly makes it more visible at night, though not necessarily during the day. In fact, I think it would be harder to see during the day. It also makes it a mutant because they're supposed to be blue. So the flower is a mutation, and Frost certainly lived in a time when people knew about genetic mutation. Uh, the poem uses the word kindred. The thing that is akin, there may be other factors, but one thing the first stanza makes clear is that these three things are brought together at night and they're all white. The spider is white, the flower is white, even though they're usually blue, and the moth is white. The images in the first stanza, ask yourself whether those are wholesome, healthy sounding images or kind of creepy Halloween sounding images. Because imagery can create tone and mood for a poem. And I think Frost is using language very carefully. So you ask yourself whether this is the kind of language that makes you feel um, that the relationship among the spider, the moth, and the flower is wholesome and natural, or kind of weird and supernatural, or uh, disturbing. Um, Life or death, white piece of rigid satin cloth, um, death and blight, ingredients in a witch's broth. And I think it's fairly clear that it's there's something disturbing about the confluence, the grouping of these three things. Now, the person who speaks the poem doesn't necessarily see the scene at night. It is not clear whether the scene came together at night. There's no question about it. And in fact, it's almost necessary that those three things come together at night for reasons I'll get into in just a second. But it's quite possible that the person who's looking just arbitrarily glanced over and happened to see a scene that would have been visible clearly at night because the things in it are white in night's dark, or if he's looking at night, it would be obvious stuff because it would stand out: the spider, the moth, the flower. If he's looking in the morning, it would have to be more arbitrary. They're mixed ready to begin the morning right. Ask what kind of tone that is, if right is rhyming with blight. Uh, question what brings them together. The poem is about that and the design that might have arranged for these three things to come together. Part of that is the character of the ingredients that are creatures of instinct. Um, think about where spiders like to spin webs. They do pick spots where bugs like to go. And if you ever owned a bug zapper or know somebody who has, you know that a lot of bugs, moths, other kinds of bugs, are attracted to lights at night. They like the warmth. Insects don't generate body heat, so they need the warmth. And they are drawn to the warmth. And I don't know whether spiders know that. I don't know whether the question of knowing is appropriate to ask for spiders. But out of instinct, they do like to put their webs where the webs will catch insects on their way to light sources. Well, the spiders put a web or created a trap out of flower that just happens because of an arbitrary genetic characteristic to be white when it ought to have been blue. If it had been blue, it would be invisible at night. But white, it's a light source. It reflects ambient light. Um, and spiders sitting on top of it because the spider's like, okay, a bug will come here and I'll eat the bug. But the spider doesn't really say that to itself. The spider's not thinking any more than other creatures in nature are actually, like birds don't get together and have a convocation where they say, should we go south this winter or should we stay where we are? Well, I think we've always gone south and we tend to have we do better when we go. People do that. They can decide where to go on vacation or whether to, you know, whether they like snow or sun better. But birds don't do that, as far as I know. They just go because instinct drives them. A certain time of year goes south. And birds have much bigger brains than spiders do, or than moths do. So moths and spiders do what they do here because that's the way that nature's made them. And the questions the poem's asking in the second stanza are about the maker, just like Blake asks questions about the nature of God's mind in The Tiger. Um, but Blake's not calling the maker by any particular kind of name because Frost's time, the theory of evolution was well known, controversial, still is, but it was well known and was in competition with various theological models for explanations of why things do what they do and are what they are in nature and where instincts might come from. Darwin would say they have a survival value, and that survival value develops over millennia through a process of essentially random mutation. Most mutations are either harmful or do nothing for help or for harm for the creatures that have the mutation. But occasionally, a mutation will actually have a survival value under certain circumstances. For example, a an insect might have a higher species, or this is not an individual thing, but the species of moths might do better as a species if they are attracted to heat and light sources than if they're not, because nature's also designed them to not generate their own body heat. So if it's a cold night, then they need to seek out warm places. And for the species, they do better seeking out the warm spaces, even though a few of them will invariably fall prey to spiders, who are also acting on an instinct. Spiders get eaten too, but on the whole, their species does better if they're if they have a mutation that causes them instinctively to seek out light sources. It's not that individuals think through those kinds of behavioral mechanisms. It's that nature creates those imperatives over millions and millions of years by taking certain mutations that impart a higher survival value and allowing those to breed true. Because the insects or the spiders that have those mutations do better. So the second stanza is where the critical questions are asked. What had the flower to do with being white? It's a genetic mutation. Did the flower decide it was going to be white? Or, I don't want to be blue like all the other flowers. I want to be white. You don't decide that any more than you get to decide on your eye color when you're like still a gleam in your parents' eyes. That's just something that gets taken care of for you. The flower doesn't decide to be white. It's a mutation. But the speaker's asking a kind of question, the titles they give away on this. Who designed this inner relationship, this complex set of inner relationships? What brought the kindred spider? Kindred because it's white, kindred also possibly because it's a mutation, to the top of the flower. And what brought the white moth to the same place? Why did that all come together at that one time and place? Is that a result of random mutations? Is it a result of a design that is kind of created into them by an all-knowing maker of patterns? Is it something arbitrary about the fact these three white things happened to cross paths that night? The questions are really open-ended. What but design of darkness to appall it? I suggest you look up the word appall and really look up where it came from, as well as what it means, because its sources in Old French and Latin are revealing, and I mean that quite literally. Also consider what a pallbearer does at a funeral. A pall is a certain word. Frost is making a pun. To appall is a verb. A pall, P-A-L-L, is something else. But is darkness a pall, P-A-L-L, or is darkness appalling? And does that line mean that darkness is the designer of the scene that the speaker sees? If design govern in a thing so small. Well, I don't know if it's a small thing because the speaker made a lot out of it. And this is kind of something that's along the same lines as a wind chime metaphor that I mentioned before. Where does the meaning come from in this scene that's described by the speaker? Because if the speaker hadn't glanced over and said, look, there's a spider sitting on top of a white flower with a dead moth in its mouth, or pincers, or whatever a spider has that's holding on to its prey, just like waiting for him. If he hadn't looked, would it be there? I suppose you could say it would be. But it seems like it takes the speaker to make the scene complete. And then whose design is it? Because there are a lot of potential answers to the question, whose design? It could be the design of Satan, of darkness, of some kind of moral bleakness that makes predators. That would go with what Blake says. Blake's speaker says in the Tiger. It could also be just a design of randomness. Darkness of unknowing. We don't know why things come together. So here's some possible answers. I have no idea which one is right. I just want you to consider that this is a scene that could be designed by a creator, by totally random natural forces. And either of those answers could be scary, depending on how you read the presence of predator and prey in the poem, in the relationship to the speaker. But it could be that it's God. It could be that it's natural selection. It could be that it's the speaker, that it's the speaker who's created the design where what he's looking at is just blankness. It's like we look at the stars, and some people are inclined to see patterns in the stars. It's like there's Orion, or there's Sagittarius, there are the signs of the zodiac, as if the stars had intentionally arranged themselves so as to give meaning to human beings. And it's interesting because it raises a question that I think Frost is playing around with here. When we see patterns of things that we find interesting, are the patterns interesting because they are in themselves significant, or are they interesting because we've decided to make them interesting? We are pattern makers. Human beings are. We're the ones who like to make link-ups. Like the stars mean something because we're looking up at them. Well, do they? Or do they mean something because we need to find meaning in the stars? Otherwise, it would be terrifying to stare at the night sky and just see a vast assortment of random stars that don't make any patterns that have anything to do with us. Pick your poison. What's more comforting to look at? The signs of the zodiac, as if the stars are arranged just so we can see the way that they fit together from our place, our tiny place on the third-rate edge of a third-rate spiral arm of a third-rate galaxy, or we're at the center of things, so that everything in the heavens is arranged so it has meaning for us. Does the meaning come from our brains or from what we're looking at? All of that is stuff Frost is playing with in this point. I want you to play with it. I don't want to say what I think. I want you to look for patterns and then ask why you look for the patterns you do and why Frost might be playing a game with that. That is all I have on that one.